Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas, and this is how to make a simple Notepad app in Unity, and welcome to episode 1. So this series is all about app development rather than game development, because Unity can be used to develop apps if you so wish. And this series is going to be perfect for absolute beginners who are just venturing into app development. So we're going to go through all the things you'd expect to see within Unity, and at the end of it we'll have a nice little app that we can use on our Android or Apple devices. So, as I say, this series is aimed at absolute beginners, and if anything you want to see, add in a couple of things, then just leave a comment. The series isn't going to go on too long. I think probably about 7 or 8 tutorials. But yeah, let's get straight into it. So, once you've got Unity, if you're not sure what to do whilst installing it, you'll have something which looks a little like this. You have to absolutely make sure that you have at least Unity installed. Good idea to have standard assets installed, and for the actual platforms you want to develop for, in this case, make sure we have Android and iOS ticked, because these two are what we're aiming for in this series. So once you've got it up and running, you should have something which looks a little like this screen. This is the new project window. Let's call our project something, so let's call it Notepad App. We have to make sure that the template is going to be 2D, because we're doing all of this in 2D rather than a 3D environment. And then select the location right here. And you don't need any S packages. We don't really need Unity Analytics for this, but if you so wish, you can turn it on. And then click on Create Project. And once it thinks for just a couple of minutes, you will have something which looks a little like this. So it's worth noting at this point, while I'm recording this at this very moment in time, I'm using Unity 2018.1. However, this will work for any version of Unity after Unity 5, which came out in 2015. So as long as you're using Unity within the past couple of years, this will work perfectly. Even if you're using Unity 2019, 2020, the process will still be the same. So at this point, let's have a little look at what we have. So if you've got some knowledge of Unity, you already know what this layout already is. If you're brand new, you may have used a couple of other things, maybe Unreal, maybe something like Blender. You'll have an idea of what's going on with all these windows here. And generally, this would be great to follow along for any beginner, even if you have some knowledge of Unity and want to try apps. This series is going to be fantastic for you, because it'll be a nice starting point, and then you can venture off on your own and see what you can come up with. So over here we have the hierarchy, and the hierarchy is a place where we store all our game objects in text form. So you can see here that I can click on the game object. We only have one in this version. If you are using an older version of Unity, you may have 2 here. You may have a directional light or something. I think it just depends on the version. But yes, this is where we can select any actual object in this scene view. So I'm just going to select this little tool here, the move tool, and you'll see that the object we have selected in the scene view has arrows on it, and we can move things around using these arrows in the scene view. The scene view is where we see everything that we have placed into the game. So if we created a model or something like that, it fits in here and we can see it perfectly. Next thing we have is the game view, and at the moment it's just a big blue screen. There's nothing to it because we literally have no game to render here. Although we have a camera which will render something, there is nothing to actually see. But when we do try out our app, we will see it in the game view right here. And the asset store is something which we probably won't touch on in this series, but it's where you can get a load of assets and stuff paid for free. It's worth checking out, honestly, it really is. So over here we have the inspector panel. The inspector panel is a nice little place where we see tons of different statistics related to the object that we have selected, either in the hierarchy or the scene view. So I'll point out here we have nothing selected, absolutely nothing. If we click on this little camera, we actually select by default in the hierarchy. So we can see here, this is called a component. And each actual object within Unity will have a component. By default, they all should have transform, and transform is basically telling you where it's located, how big it is, and if it's rotated or not. All these numbers and statistics relate to that perfectly. And this is just an extra component for the camera right here. We'll go more into components sooner or later, probably next episode to be honest, but there's tons of different components you can add to each object to make it do different things. So down here we have the project window, and this is where we store all our assets. So an asset is defined as something like a texture, something like a model, something like a script maybe. We would store them all down here and we'd be able to see them in a nice view basically. And by default, if you go to scenes, if you're using the version I'm using, you will have this sample scene. Sample scene is what this is right here. It's an actual scene that we can load. And I don't think the older versions have this, certainly not Unity 5. But yes, this is classed as an asset as well. Every scene is also classed as an asset. Next, we have the console. The console may be used in this series because it is a good place to tell us if there is, for example, an error in one of our scripts. So if we have a script that we have maybe missed off something or spelt something wrong, it would tell us here what script has the problem and what line it is. Animation is just a way of animating objects nice and simply within Unity itself. And I don't think we'll be using it in this series, but there are plenty of other series that I do which use this animation tab. One extra thing to note here is that we can move these windows around. So for example, the game view we could always put over here at the hierarchy. That's good. If not, we could always move it down here below. And same applies to everything else. We could move the console up over here. And we could also take, let's say, the game view out to be its own little window. It's entirely up to you how you want to lay out your game. So we'll be doing this in a portrait view. So it might be wise to shift your windows around into the right kind of view. And if you go to Window, Layouts, you can also save your layout. If you don't fancy creating it yourself, there are a couple of different layouts that you can choose from, as we can see. I have a nice simple one. If I go to Window, Layouts and Portrait Mobile, and there we go. This is the layout I will be using for this series. So next thing we need to do is let's start looking at how to develop an actual app. Now, the important thing to note is the platform that we are developing for. So if we go to File and go to Build Settings just here, we need to select one of these here. By default, it is built for PC, Mac and Linux, but if you want to develop for iOS or Android, you could just click on them and then click on Switch Platform. So I'm going to aim for Android for this one. So I'm going to click on Switch Platform. Now, it should be relatively quick. Generally, if a project gets large, it may take a while to switch platform, but because in this series, the actual app itself isn't really going to be very large, it shouldn't take too long to switch between whatever platform you want to build for. So anything you build in Unity can be built and ported to any supported platform here. There's no limitations. As long as the platform is supported and you have the license, if it's required, you can build it. So Unity is very object oriented, I should say. Not to say there isn't just as much coding, because there is. And generally, everything we introduce into Unity could be classed as an object. So if we close this build settings now, and let's go to Game Object, and let's go to UI, and let's go to Text. And you can see that instantly, we can't really see much that's actually happened here. The reason for that is because over here, we have these settings which aren't really relating to anything at all. So if we double click on this text that is inserted here in our hierarchy, we'll be able to see it a little bit better. Now, it's worth noting that a canvas has been inserted and an event system. Don't need to worry too much about the event system, but the canvas is where every UI element, so everything we see visually on the screen, is stored, at least for UI. If we have normal objects, normal textures on, for example, a cube, this wouldn't be in the canvas, it'd just be in the main hierarchy. So just remember, the canvas is just for UI. So we have the text down here, and you can see it in new text. We need to move this, let's say, to the top here. So let's go to our inspector panel over here. Position, let's set everything to 0. So 0 and 0 we'll bring it to the center. So if we double click again, we'll be able to see over here. So remember, the scene view is where we build the actual app itself. And when we press play up here, we'll be able to see it actively in the game window. But because we have both active, we can see what's actually going to be rendered, but we can't actually use what's going to be rendered unless we press play. But there's no point at the moment because we just have this text. So let's work with this text and see if we can get it up here. And let's just say Notepad App. So firstly, what we could do is select our move tool. And if we use our middle mouse wheel, we can zoom out. And now we have it selected, we can hold the left mouse button and drag up here. And let's keep it in the center because perfect, that's what you would want. And let's change the text over here. And let's just type in Notepad App. So a great way of actually checking if things are going to look just fine is actually pressing play. But like I say, we can already see it here. But let's just see what happens when we press play. Everything will go a little bit darker and we'll be able to see if we actually had something here, what would it look like? That's basically what you would have. You can see the whole scene has gone, or rather the whole engine has gone a little bit darker. And this is highlighted. So to stop, you press play again. So let's change our color of the text. So if we select this bar here, and then you'll be presented with a wheel if you're using a newer version of Unity. If it's an old one, I think it's just this actual box here. So let's set this as white, and let's set the font size as larger than what it is. So let's say 28. Now you can see the text has disappeared. And it's disappeared from our scene view here. So let's get that sorted. There's a couple of ways you could do that. You could either change the width and the height here. So let's set the width as 200. Still can't see it. Let's set the height as 50. You can see it. So if we set it back to 30, and then over here, we have a rect tool. If we select it, you'll see that the object itself is surrounded by blue dots, and we can hover over, hold the left mouse button and drag to resize. Now, a great thing about using the rect tool is that you can actually snap things together quite easily. And I'm going to click on alignment center. So we get that dead center. And now if we select the actual object itself, the text, and we can move it around like this, you can see that if we snap it to the middle, it has a blue line. And that blue line means it is dead center. So let's move it up. So now this text is dead center because the object is dead center, and we have it aligned to the center as well. Now, there's not a lot to really go through in regards to beginning Unity because it is relatively simple. If you've gone through this tutorial and taken your time just getting to grips with things, learning the layout of things, then you shouldn't really have a problem. So the last thing we're going to do at this point is right click, rename, and let's just call this Note Title. Perfect. So it's always wise to name things within the hierarchy something sensible rather than just having text 1, text 2, text 3, text 4, because then it's always relative and you know what that object is if you need to change it. So if we save this scene now, it will save to this sample scene down here, and we don't really want that. So what we'll do is File, Save Scene As, and let's save this scene as Main App. And it's stored now in our main actual assets folder rather than the scenes folder. Generally, when I've created things in the past in Unity, I've always kept my scenes at top level here. It's entirely up to you if you want to move your scenes into a scenes folder. There's only going to be 2 scenes in this entire project, so we're not going to be overwhelmed with an incredible amount of scenes. So it's up to you how you want to keep that. So that's the end of this early tutorial. That's pretty much all the basics done. From here on out, we're going to get some cool stuff done. Next episode, we are going to look at some buttons. So we need to press things, we need to do things. We'll look at an input box, i.e. where we can type all our text. And we'll start looking at making it look a little bit prettier. and using some fonts. So in this episode, we are going to take a look at some buttons, which is more UI. We're going to take a look at some fonts and how we can use them. And we'll also look at an input box, which is going to be our actual notepad itself. So firstly, let's go to Game Object, UI, and let's choose Button. You'll notice this comes into the canvas much in the same way as the original text that we did last episode did. And again, it's a case of everything in this is going to be UI based, so everything is likely to be under the canvas. Now, we're going to select over here, anchor, bottom right. And the reason we actually use the anchoring position is because every screen has a different size, it has a different resolution, you know, they're not all the same. So having these anchor points ensures that whenever we start the app on whatever mobile device we have, it always makes sure that that object is in that same position. So if we move this button now down here to the bottom right, because it's anchored to the bottom right, it will always display there in that exact same position, no matter what the size of the screen. So attached to the button is a text object, and this text object is pretty much the same as what we had up here. It's the same sort of function. So we can type up here in the text section the name of this button, and this button is going to be a clear button, so we want to erase everything that is within the notepad itself. So clear. It's up to you whether you want this to be capitalized, lowercase. You know, it's your app, it's not my app. I just show you the mechanics on how to do it. I'm going to have the font style as bold, because why not? And I'm going to keep the font size as 14, I think, and it's up to you whether you want to align, change color. Again, it's your app. So the button itself has a couple of different things. The main one we're going to look at, in this episode at least, is this one, the button script. This one we'll deal with in the next episode because I got something cool for that one. So it's up to you what you want to have as your normal color. Normal color is the way the button is represented now. In other words, it's white. The highlighted color is slightly darker, and what it means is when you hover your mouse over it, it will change color when in play mode. So if we press play and hover over, we can see maybe it changes ever so slightly. But while still in play mode, if we go over here to a highlighted color and select, let's say, red, we can hover over it and it will turn red. However, if we stop the game mode now, it will revert to its original color. The reason being is that we cannot make changes whilst in play mode. It just doesn't let you. All you need to do is stop and then make the changes. So just be mindful that if you make any changes in play mode, you'll have to redo them when you exit. So let's change our highlighted color to maybe a bit of a blue color. And if we press play, we can see, nice. Now the great thing about buttons in Unity is they're kind of already pre-programmed to work on either PC or touch screens. We don't need any extra programming to make these buttons work, and that is so much help, trust me. So as it stands now, if we were to put this onto an Android device or an Apple device, this button would work. You'd be able to touch this button and it would change color. Well, according to this anyway, to the pressed color, which is what I want to move on to next. It depends what you want to have as your pressed color. I'm going to leave it as it is, a kind of a grey color, but not too dark. And you'll see when we press play, you can see it goes to that grey color, and that's fine. So by standard, it has Arial as the font, which we can see here in the text. So I'm going to create a new folder down here in my project window, and I'm going to call it fonts. So everything you create down here in the window can easily be done by right-clicking, and you have a nice menu here. Create here has plenty of things to choose from, and we'll go into a couple of them as time goes along, but they're not too important right now. So if we go into our fonts folder, I'm going to drag and drop this font into Unity. Now, I'm not going to distribute this font, but you can take a look at it at Google if you want to. Just Google Expressway font, and you should be able to find it. So what I've done here is I've imported an object or an item which can be used as an asset, and this can apply for fonts, textures, videos, even scripts if you so need to, but pretty much anything you drag and drop can be an asset. But one thing to be careful of, if the asset is in a zipped folder, you'll need to unzip it before you can drag and drop into Unity. Now, it's as simple as just dragging and dropping this onto here, and that's how you change the font. There we go. You can also change the font by clicking this little radius button here and selecting the font you wish. So same again with the note title. Let's have that drag and drop. And I'm going to change it to Jimmy's Notepad. I'm just going to bring it up slightly to about there. So next thing we're going to look at is the input field. And the input field, like I say, is the main notepad of the app. So if we go to Game Object, go to UI, and down here, Input Field. So by default, it'll just give you this little text box. And what we want to do is select the anchoring position and stretch right there. What this does is it makes sure that, again, no matter what size of the screen, it always looks the same on any device. So let's now move this into the position we want to see it. So let's move it up to about here. The reason I've not got it right to the top is because I want a couple of buttons up here, maybe a line of text just for the app. And then I'm going to drag it to about here. So now it looks pretty decent. It actually looks like a notepad that you would expect to see on a phone or something. So underneath input field, we have two things. We have a placeholder and text. And obviously the input field also has a couple of components. The text, this is important. We don't need to worry about this just for now, but the placeholder is where you see here, enter text. It's entirely up to you if you want to keep this placeholder or not. If we disable it up here using this little tick, it will disappear. If we keep it, you'll see it there. However, when we press play and we start typing, it does disappear, so we don't need to worry about it. Again, it's your app. It's up to you whether you want to have this there or not. I'm going to leave it there for now, but chances are I may remove it at some point. The main thing we have to note with this input field is over here in the inspector panel, if we scroll down to here where we have line type, we need to change that to multi-line new line. The reason being is that by default it's only one line, and a notepad isn't one line, is it? So we can type, hit return or enter, and then we go to the next line. Easy. So you can already see how this app is coming together to be multi-line, and this works the same way as pretty much any other UI object that we have. You don't necessarily have to have this white. You could change it to black if you wanted to and have the text as white. Maybe we set up some options for that. Who knows? It just depends how you want your app to be. Again, I cannot stress enough, it is your app, not my app. This is you making this. I'm showing you how to do it. And if you wanted to, you could select a couple of different options, whether you want it single line or not. It's entirely up to you. I would recommend at least going through some of these options to maybe kind of get yourself familiar with things. It's, it's good to actually play around, and don't worry about ever going wrong with Unity. If you do something wrong, you can always hold Control, press Z to undo it. It's easy as that. So by default, you could have some text here, but it's probably not worth it because, well, that's just the way it is, really. So I'm going to save my scene, hold Control, press S to save. So next episode, guys, what we're going to take a look at is we're going to get into some C# coding. Now, some people do find C# coding a little tricky. However, we don't need to be that complex with how we code in this tutorial. I will show you everything you need. So we'll be dealing with things like namespace and variables. If you've heard of them before, that's fine. If not, I will explain everything you need to know. And what else I want to look at is actually making these buttons look a little more appealing, because as they stand right now, they're a little bit plain and boring. They may serve a decent purpose, but they're not how I want them to look in the end. So we're going to make them look a little bit fancier, not just colourful. So it's all about you now. And what I would recommend you do before the next episode is get an image in your head of how you want your app to look. So I'm going to quickly brief you guys now on how I am going to make this app look. I'm going to have this clear button here. I'm going to have a save button here. I may have an options button here. I haven't quite decided yet. And up here, I'm going to have a little X to close the app, which means that I guess I could probably bring this notepad up a little more, maybe to about there. And over this side, I'm going to have a little option which says saved or not saved, just so as it gives us a bit more insight. And also we're going to have different ways of coding problems, i.e. if we're exiting and not saving. So as I say, maybe you should get a pen and paper, pencil paper, whatever you want, and you should draw how you want your app to look, maybe in this perspective. If you want it portrait, that's fine. If you want it landscape, that's fine. But I'm going to go for portrait. So this tutorial, we're going to take a look at some C# coding, and we're also going to apply some texture to our button right here. Don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon as well. Stay up to date with every tutorial in this short series. And with that in mind, let's get to work. So we're going to start by creating kind of like a texture for this button here, rather than just have it plain and boring. So I'm going to right click down here, create a new folder, and in here we're going to store any textures that we bring in. So we'll just call it textures. So in the folder, I'm now going to drag and drop this yellow button texture right here. And you can get this on the website, Downloads and Assets, Notepad App, and under tutorial number 3. When you bring it in, it may look like this, it may not. You can tell it is actually a sprite by the little icon, the little play button thing next to it. If yours is set as default, like this, you would not have that there. That's actually known as just a normal texture, but we need it to be a sprite so we can apply it to this button right here. So if yours does look like this, you just need to click up here on texture type and change it to sprite, and then click on apply. If it already does come in as a sprite, then you don't need to worry about it at all. So next thing we need to do is click on the button over here and then just drag and drop that sprite image onto this source image over here in the image component. Drag and drop. Nice and simple, and there we go. It's now applied to our button. It is simple as that. So how do we get this button working? Well, we're going to use some C# coding to actually get it doing exactly what we want it to do. So let's go over here to Assets, right click, create a new folder, because we're going to store all our scripts within this folder. So let's call it scripts. Now within this folder, we need to right click, create C# script. And it is important we remember what we call this script, just in case we need to make any changes to it later on. And let's have this known as button control. So any control via buttons within this entire app is going to be done in this script. So let's double click and open it up in Visual Studio. So if you've never ever coded before, or maybe just done a little bit of coding, maybe in a different language, and don't fully understand what's all these lines mean and everything, please don't worry, we're going to go through this step by step and explain as much as possible. If you've done coding before, you probably know what's going on. So you'll be presented with this. So what are all these lines of code? Well, these first 3 lines of code are known as the namespace. And a namespace is a way of the script recognizing what data it has to pull from to actually make itself work. So because we're going to be using UI, remember, everything we're doing in here is classed as UI, we need to actually add in a UI namespace. And we can do that by going underneath using Unity Engine right there, hit return, and then type using Unity Engine .ui and a semicolon. So there's going to be a couple of things there. If you're new to coding, you don't fully understand why we've done it. Firstly is the capitalization, so the capital U and the capital E. It is case sensitive. We have to make sure that every piece of code is case sensitive, because if we were to put a lowercase u right there, it would underline and say, no, that's not right, that's incorrect. It has to be an uppercase U, capitalization. The next thing is this semicolon at the end. Why have we used a semicolon? Well, you'll notice all the lines above it also have a semicolon. Most lines of code will end with a semicolon, if not end or begin with a curly bracket. So speaking of which, we can see down here we have this line of code: public class, button control, mono behavior with an open curly bracket. What is this? This is the class. This is where the script is stored. So everything we create, apart from the namespace, is going to be done inside the class. And if we click this end curly bracket, we can see that it highlights the beginning section of it. So all of that is enclosed. And you can also see the dotted line will account for the whole thing, so it brings up the corresponding open and close brackets. Easy. So what are these inside the class? Well, these green lines are known as annotations, and they're a way of making notes in your script. These are lines which are not code and will not be executed when we run the script. These are just there for notes. Below it we have void start. This is known as a method. Same with void update. Anything that starts with something like void is known as a method, and a method is something that we can call where all the script is stored. So for example, we have some lines of code in void start. That means, as it's dictated here, it will just do once whatever is in here when the script starts. And this method, void update, will be called once per frame, so it will be continuous. So a method can either be started once, it can be continuous, or it could be something that we call at any given time. And that's something that we're going to do in this script. So how do we get everything working? Well, what we want to do is be able to clear all of this text by clicking this button. So the objects that we're referring to, there's two of them. There is the button and there is the text. We need to declare the text as a variable. This script is going to be directly attached to the button, so we don't need to worry about that as an object. We only need to worry about the variable, which is going to be the text. So how do we do this? Well, let's clear the methods it's given us and the notes, because we don't need them. So we can highlight those two methods and the notes and press delete, and we'll be left just with the public class. So how do we declare variables? Well, it's fairly easy. Because we want to see it inside the inspector panel, I'll explain why later on, we'll need to type the word public, and then we declare the variable type. In this case, it's going to be a game object, and remember, capitalization is important, so we need to type game object. That's a capital G and a capital O. So we could have various different variables. You know, we could have numbers, we can have audio, we can have text, we could have different things, we have strings, all kinds of different things. But like I say, in this case, we need to reference it as a game object. And now, after we've declared the type, we need to put the name of it. We can call this anything we want, but let's call it something reasonable that we would understand. So let's just call it the text, semicolon. Remember that semicolon ends the line. So now we need to write our own method to clear whatever is in this game object, the text. And to do that, we actually need to have this method public. The reason we're going to have it public is because the button needs it to be that way so it can reference it. If we didn't have this method as public, the button would not work with it. So we need to type public void, and remember capitalization, and we can call this method anything we want. So because we're going to keep it relevant, let's call it clear text, and then open close bracket and open curly bracket and hit return or enter, whichever, and then you'll be presented with the open close bracket for that method. So everything we type inside this method is something that we can then call when we press that button, but there's a little bit of work to get that all in place. So let's concentrate on the line of code which will allow us to clear that text. So the text is the big thing. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're using. So let's start with that. The text. And then dot. And then we need to reference a way of what we're doing. So if we click on this input field, which is the actual component we use, we need to reference the input field component. So how do we do that in script? Well, if we start typing get component, you can see it's highlighted exactly what we want right there. So it kind of predicts what it thinks you're going to do. So in this case, we do need get component. Then open spiky bracket, and within inside this spiky bracket, we type the name of that component. In this case, it is input field. And you can see again, it's selected what it thinks we need to have. So then close spiky bracket and open close bracket. And next we need dot. So we have dot now because we need to reference something within that specific place. We need to reference this particular object within that component, and it's known as just text. So capitalization, as I said, is important, and although this is a capital T right here, we should not reference it with a capital T inside the script. That's just the way components work. So when we're referencing a component, the first bit in this case is capitalized, so it is the same, but any subsection of that component starts with a lowercase letter. It's just kind of defined between the two. So in this case, it is just text. So what do we need to do with this text? We need to make it equals nothing. So we can put equals and then 2 quotes and then a semicolon. So what has this done exactly? Well, if we were to put, for example, 9 moons right there, when we press the button, it would change whatever is in this text to actually say 9 moons. But we don't really want that, do we? We want it to be blank. So that's why we have 2 quote marks, because that will set it as blank. So now let's save that script. So hold Control, press S, or go File and Save. And you'll notice it's saved because you'll have the green down the side to say, all good. When we go back to Unity, it will just compile. You'll notice this little icon down the bottom right, just compiling. If you have any errors, it will give you the error down here in your status bar and in the console as well. But since we don't have any errors, we're okay for now. It's only a couple of lines of code. So how do we get this script working how we want it to? Well, we have to actually attach it to the scene inside the hierarchy. So we can go to Game Object and click on Create Empty, and this will give us a completely empty game object with no components other than the transform component where we can attach anything we want. In this case, we can drag and drop the script we've written straight on. And you'll notice it appears over here as an actual component. Next, let's right click and rename this game object, and we'll call this app controls. So any script we write will be attached to this object, and we can contain everything nice and neatly within the app. It's simple. So we have that text component right there. The button control component with the text variable. So we need to attach whatever variable that needs to be. And remember, that's the input field. So it's this object here. We can drag and drop that over here. And you'll notice, perfect, it applies it. So whenever this script runs, it will reference the text variable as being this object right here. So we're almost there, but how do we get that button to actually work the way we want it to? Well, if we click on the button itself, over here in the button component, we have onClick. Currently, list is empty. We need to create a function for it. So if we click on plus, it will give us the ability to add a game object down here. And it needs to stay in runtime only because we need it to be, runtime. Well, if you should know what runtime is. It kind of allows us to do it anytime, really. So we just need to drag and drop our app controls down here onto this game object. And then this no function bar will highlight, and we just need to click on it, go down to our script name, which was button control, and it'll give you a whole load of options, but the one we're looking for is clear text, because that's the method that we wrote. So what's happening here is this button will now run this method when we click it. So if we press play, go to our notepad, and let's type some random text. When we press clear, it will disappear. Simple as that. So that is how we can actually use C# coding to our advantage. And do it again. Clear. And we're going to be doing some more C# coding because there's more to be done within this. Obviously, we're going to need to type stuff. We're going to need to save stuff. We're going to need to close the app and do all kinds of stuff. So there is more C# coding to come. So next tutorial, we're going to focus a little bit more on layout. We'll probably add in a background as well, and there will be more C# coding. So in this tutorial, we're going to take a look at our layout of the actual app. So a bit of background in there. We'll do some more C# coding, and we'll also add in a quick sound effect, just so as there is a bit more depth to the app. And don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon as well, stay up to date with every tutorial in this series. And with that in mind, let's get to work. So, for a background, the best way we can actually do this is dealing with something called the Asset Store. Now, the Asset Store is a fantastic place where you can find lots of resources and all kinds of different things. And I have to say that overall, there is an insane amount of things that you can actually get from that Asset Store. And you can actually get to it by holding Control and pressing 9. And you will be presented here with the Asset Store. Now, currently, as of recording this video, there are two different versions of the Asset Store. The first one looks like this, but you can shop on the old store by clicking right here and going Shop on Old Store. So it's up to you, whichever one you want to do. I'll show you how to do both, but either way, we're going to deal with something called Skybox, and the one I'm using is called Farland Skies. So I'm going to type Farland Sky. There we are, Farland Skies. So we can use one of these if you want to. So I'll go with, let's say this one for now. And we can go down and preview, and we can just import or whatever, and it's basically just a free version. If to do it on the old store, you would just go on Shop on Old Store, and generally you could do something else. Let's start searching for Skybox. You don't necessarily have to use a Skybox, by the way, guys. I'm just doing it because it just makes things a bit prettier. Click on free only because everything we do is free. And if we scroll down, we can see, there we are, same one. And you just need to click import or download, and it will bring it into your project. And I already have done right here. Make things easier and quicker. And we can see here we have skyboxes. Quite a few, so it's up to you which one you want to deal with. If we go to Window and go to Rendering and then go to Light Settings right here, we can actually set a skybox material up here. So let's click on the little radio button there. And it will present this right here, and we can choose one of those that we've just imported. So let's go for evening. Okay, so yeah, that looks okay. So let's try, I don't know, sunset maybe, midnight, I guess, midday, daybreak. You can literally pick any you want. So again, it's entirely up to you. I'm going to go with midnight for now. And you can see already in the scene view what it's done. It's applied it right there. So if I press play, we're not going to see too much here. That's because of our camera. So if I go to main camera, and we need to go on culling mask and set nothing and clear flags skybox. So now when we press play, this is what it will look like. So we can see we have that little background right there, looks fairly decent, and it should do the trick. So you can have any kind of background you want. This is just something I've quickly thought, yeah, that looks fine. And we can see down here in our camera preview, this is what our phone would look like, obviously without the UI elements on top. So this is what the background would look like. So next, let's deal with some sound effects. So we're going to create a new folder down here in our assets. Right click, create folder, audio. Now, there's not going to be too much audio within this app, so I'm not going to create any subfolders. I'm going to drag and drop this clear text audio file, and you can get this on the website. Head over there, downloads and assets, Notepad app, and tutorial number 4, and you can download it for free. So to get this working, what we'll need to do is on main camera, right click, create empty, right there. So it adds an extra game object under it. This is known as parent and childing. So game object that we've just created is the child object. Main camera is the parent object. So these two are now linked together. So if main camera moves around, game object will also move around. So I'm going to right click, rename, and call this one clear text audio. And then I'm going to drag and drop, make sure we are selected on clear text audio. I'm going to drag and drop this clear text audio file over here in the inspector panel. And it will add this component called audio source. So basically, all we really need to do is untick play on awake. What that means is that when it's ticked, it will play the sound as soon as the game starts. Obviously, something like loop would continually play the sound constantly. And we only want it to play once when we say so. So we need to make sure everything is unticked. You could play around with the pitch, volume, I guess it's up to you, but for basic reasons we just need it to be the simple sound that it is. So how do we get this working with our clear button? Well, if you remember, the clear button itself, this one right here, has the app controls attached to it, which if we click it highlights yellow, and if we click that we can see it's known as button control. So let's go to that script that we've written called button control. We're going to edit this now so as we have the ability to actually add more detail into the script. So once you've written a script, it's quite easy to modify and add more to that script. So when it's loaded in Visual Studio, we'll be presented with what we created last time. So what we need to do is add in that extra variable. And remember, the type, this one, was game object. The type of this one we're going to create now is audio source. So we need to go public audio source, and we'll call it clear sound, semicolon. So this only is going to occur when we press the clear button. So at the same time we clear it here, we need to put in clear sound dot play, open close bracket, semicolon, and save. It's as simple as that. It's just 2 extra lines of code to get that audio file play at the same time as clearing the text. So if we head back into Unity and allow the script to compile, we can see down here on the right a little wheel. There we go. And now on app controls, on the button control component, we have that clear sound non-audio source. That means we drag and drop the file that we created up here. Remember, clear text audio. This is the variable, and that goes over here, like so. And now if we press play, we can edit whatever we want in the app. So we can type all that, and we'll clear, and we'll also have that audio file play at the same time. There we go. So it's up to you if you want to use that same audio file. It's just a little something I got and just added in there, but you can use any audio file. You don't have to use an audio file if you want. It's your app at the end of the day. You can create it in whatever way you see fit. So if I stop that now, and I'm going to import this close texture. Again, you can get this on the website. So although I don't want it in the scripts folder, I'm actually going to drop it in the textures folder right here. Perfect. And much like with the yellow button, if it imports as a texture, all you need to do is just make sure you change the texture type up here to Sprite, 2D and UI, and then click on Apply. So as you probably guessed, this is going to be our close button, and much in the same way we've dealt with clear, we're just going to put this in place ready for our next tutorial. So all we need to do is game object, UI, and go down to button. And let's place this button at the top right. So we'll anchor it at the top right. So anchoring, top right, 0 out the position. And let's arrange it so it actually fits quite nicely. I may shrink the Jimmy's notepad. So shrink that a little bit, recenter. And the button, I'm going to use the rect tool and just increase the size and make it a little bit more square. So probably about that. And let's place it there. And now, again, you've probably guessed already, we just need to add this to the button itself. So drag and drop close onto button. And it becomes the actual X. And I'm going to go on text, but I'm not going to remove the text. I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to remove any words in it, just in case we need to do something else with it at a later date. So finally, let's right click and rename, and we'll call this close button. Perfect. So next tutorial, what we're going to do is we are going to have the functionality of all this working. So we're going to take a look at getting this working, the X button. So we're going to have it say, I don't know, are you sure you want to exit? Something is unsaved. We should probably also have a little note down here saying, I don't know, save, or in fact, you know what? We'll do that now before we leave. So I'm going to take the original button that we had here, And I'm going to hold Control, press D to duplicate, much like we did with that one. And I'm going to anchor it on the bottom left and just move it across to there. And let's change the text on it to say save. And I think I'm actually going to change the color of the button itself. So what I'm going to do is go on color right here and change it to green. There we go. So now we can see we've got clear and save. So like I say, next tutorial we're going to get the functionality of all these buttons working, probably deal with some more like sound effects, because the X I want to have like a warning sound if you want to close and not saved. So there's going to be more coding involved with that. So what I would recommend now, guys, is you get your layout how you want it. Like I said, this is a pretty simple app, but it's a real great introduction to app development. So in this tutorial, what we're going to do is focus on the functionality of our app, i.e. getting it to save when we click the save button. Don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon as well, stay up to date with every tutorial in this series, and with that in mind, let's get to work. So how do we enable ourselves to save whatever we have within our text? Well, the idea is we have to do two things, because realistically we need to determine what we need to save, and then we actually need to perform the save function itself. And don't forget as well, we need to also load on top of it. So we can't just save it, because then we don't really load it again. So we need to do a couple of different things in this tutorial. So let's head to our scripts folder. Let's right click, create, and click on C# script. And we'll call this save load. So it's basically just going to contain the saving and loading function. Now we have to do this slightly different than how we've done previously in our other script, because if you remember, although we have a function on there, which is the button control right here, which is our own method, we called it clear text, we have to use the start method to actually load the data in. But first we have to actually save it. Realistically, we can get rid of void update and the annotations, because we don't actually need them. So as we do this, we need to first realize that we are using UI functions. So just like in button control, we put the namespace at the top. We need to do it here as well. Using Unity engine.ui semicolon. Now, what we need to do is declare three separate variables. So the first variable is going to be a string, and a string is a way of basically saving any kind of text. So it could be number, it could be a text, it could be anything, as long as it defines it as a block of text. So the actual file itself is going to be contained with text. Even though it could just be numbers, it's going to save it as text. So let's start by going public string. Remember, that's a lowercase s because capitalization is important. And we're just going to call this the text semicolon. Now, what we need to do at this point is we need to recognize that the note and the text component are two separate things, because again, remember the button control, we dealt with input field. However, we actually need to receive data from the text field. So that's also going to be a different variable here. So we're going to need the text and the placeholder. So let's go public game object, and we'll just call it our note semicolon, and same again, public game object, and we'll just call it placeholder semicolon. Make sure we put a space there. So if I go back into Unity and go to our canvas, go to the input field, right here we can see placeholder, that's where the text is, and the text, that's where the text is yet again. So what realistically is going to happen is when we click the save button, the text is going to equal whatever text is in basically here. And we're then going to use something called a player pref to save that data. Because much like the button control, if we go on app controls here, And the input field, that is where we're going to deal with placing the text. And even though it's just placeholder, I've called it placeholder, I should say, we're going to replace what placeholder says with whatever we save. So let's get this actually working. Now, we don't need void start right now. We're going to go public and void. And we can call this something that we're going to use. So save note. And open close bracket and open curly bracket. So it would make sense to call this save note because that's exactly what it's going to do. So this means that we have to make the text equal to our note dot get component, and in spiky brackets text, open close bracket dot text semicolon. So now we, like I said earlier, we use player prefs to set this, and the way player prefs work is we can declare that we want to set either like a string or integer. If we wanted to do an integer, that would be, but obviously this is a notepad, so that wouldn't work here. And we tell it where we want to save it and what we want to save. So we do that by going player prefs dot set string, and in brackets and quotes the name of what we're setting. So this can be called anything you want. I'm going to call it note contents. Now, we have to make sure that we remember what we're calling this. We absolutely have to remember it letter for letter, because if we misspell it at any point later on in the script, then this whole thing will not work. So we've named here what we're setting in these quotes. So note contents, comma, and then what we're saving into there. So in this case, it would be the text. And close bracket, semicolon, and let's save that for now. I realize at this stage in script development, if you've never been coding before, it may become a little bit confusing because of the different things we're doing here. But I just want to assure you here that everything we're doing, I'm trying to explain the best I can. Player prefs are always going to be used for saving or transferring data. And remember, components are vital here because they're what contain the subcomponents and the information contained within those subcomponents. So realistically, what this method is doing, it's taking whatever is in this component and placing it in this variable. And then what this line is doing is making up a new file name, and think of it as an internal file name, and placing that information from the variable into that file. So now what we need to do in void start is do the inverse of that and load the player pref to load our text. So to do that, what we need to do is make the text equal to the actual player pref itself. So it works along the same way. So player prefs dot get string. So remember, set is to create, get is to load. And in brackets and quotes, the name of what we say before. I always like to copy it just in case we misspell it at any point. And then quote, close bracket, and semicolon. So now that variable is equal to what we've said. And at this point, we can use the same sort of line that we did with the button control one when we cleared it. So we would have placeholder dot get component, and in spiky brackets, it's going to be input field. So input field, open close bracket, dot text equals the text, semicolon, and save that script. So here we can quite easily see the process of what's happening. So you can think of it as we are literally doing the inverse, just with a quick modification when we're loading the text. So now if we go back into Unity and let's add this script, the save load, to our app controls object onto there. And now we just need to set those two variables. So if you remember, the text itself, that input field, that's going to work the same way as the placeholder. So we need to drag and drop input field onto there, and our note is going to be, well, let's have a quick look, shall we? So if we load up the app, we can already see what's happened there. So I've been testing this, obviously, and we know how this all works. But obviously I have to test these things before I create anything. And that was my test that you saw right there. But we can see here that if we type our text here, it is quite literally inside the text now. But that is what we have to save. We have to remember that this text is what we save, and the input field placeholder is where we load it. So if we go to our Note app now, and just make sure here, this line right here, the text and input field, these are the two most important things that you have to remember. Cannot stress that enough. Although it may seem like it should be the same, it isn't. It's just how this works functionally. So our note is going to be the text right there. And I'm going to save that scene. When I press play now, it's obviously going to load up what I've previously done and got in the player prefs once again. But you can see we can still type and do anything. And when we close it, even though we have that, it still loads the original player pref information, as we can see here. So obviously we need to get our save button working correctly. And I'm not sure I like the black text on the button itself, so I'm going to change that to white, I think. And I'm also going to rename the button as well. I'm just going to call it Save Button. So now we have to get this working. It already has the app controls attached to it, but it currently has the clear text. It's a duplicate of this clear button. So we need to go down here, go to Save Load, and then change it to Save Note. And I'm going to resave that scene. So if I press play now, again, it will load what we've previously had, but I can type whatever I want. In fact, I'll type something sensible. Jimmy has a new app, this Notepad app. So now I'm going to save. So this has now been committed to the memory within that player pref that we've called Note Contents. So even if we come out of this and press play again, it should load in Jimmy has a new app. This Notepad, even Notepad. So we've made a mistake there, so let's change that back to Notepad. Click Save. That will now be committed to memory. So it will remember that we've made that change, and it will load it right there. So even if we completely delete that and close it and press play again, it will still remember. So let's press clear and save. And then let's exit the app. And then let's start up the app again. And we'll have a blank canvas to work on. So that is the functionality of being able to save whatever you've got in your Notepad. And I think that is the most important feature of actually having a Notepad app. Because what's the point of having a Notepad app if it doesn't save what you've typed? So next tutorial, what we're going to take a look at is we're going to work a touch on animation. And we're also going to deal with the close button, as well as like a little pop-up notification to say, do you want to save or do you want to exit? Just this tutorial, we're going to take a look at creating a little bit of extra to this app with some animation and a little bit of fading with that animation, basically to say we have saved our game, and we'll see what else we can do in the time limit that we have in this tutorial. Don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon as well. Stay up to date with every tutorial in this series and everything else on my channel. And with that in mind, let's get to work. So, animation. How can we use it exactly? Well, animation is something that is very common in pretty much everything we use these days. Although it may not seem like animation sometimes, it probably is within your app. So, what we need to do really is get the animation tab available to us. Now, I normally have it down here at the bottom, but you can literally have it anywhere in your engine. You can have it here, 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 anywhere. But I'm going to click this little icon here, click on Add Tab, and click on Animation. And there we are. This is what the Animation tab looks like. And again, you can have it anywhere, so you could click here and have it here. You could click here and there, anywhere. It's entirely up to you. Customization. Anyway, to do this right, what we need to do is initially have somewhere on our app that we want animated. So what we're going to do is have a little note here that says text saved or something like that, and it'll animate downwards and fade away after we have saved our note. So to do so, I'm actually going to initially change the size of this text. So I'm going to have it smaller. Let's have it 20 maybe. And just for convenience, to have it italic as well. And I'm going to have it right at the very top of the notepad. So our saved is going to appear just here. So let's put that in place. We can actually use a great little thing called duplicate, and we've done it before. So let's take this text element right here, note title, hold control, press D. It'll duplicate, and let's move it into position somewhere probably here. And let's rename the text to say text saved. And I'm going to have it bold and probably have it a little bit smaller than what it is, so maybe 14. That looks a little bit too small. 16, maybe not bold, but I guess it's entirely up to you how you want to do this, because it's your app at the end of the day, not mine. So we're going to have it start somewhere here, so you can see text saved. And what we really need to do here is actually set the animation first off with our color. So we need to set this color as alpha 0. So change this number here where it says A to 0. And what that will do is, although it's disappeared from our app, it's actually still there. It just means that the transparency is 0, so it's completely transparent. We cannot see it at all, but it does still exist there. And what we're going to do is animate it so as it comes down and basically fades away. So how do we do this? Well, because we have the animation tab open right here, we need to make sure that this little object here is named correctly. So we just need to rename right there and call it saved text. Now, I like to kind of keep things as neat and tidy as possible, but considering there's not going to be very many assets in this, you could probably save this animation anywhere. We just have to remember that whatever folder you're in here is where the animation will saved by default. Obviously, you can change it when we do create the animation, but it's probably easier to create a new folder now and just have it as animation. So let's go into this animation folder, head to our animation tab, make sure we're on saved text, and then click on create. And let's save this animation as saved anim. And now we'll be presented with this. Looks like a bit of a graph. First thing we need to do is click on the record button. If you're using a really old version of Unity, probably before Unity 5.5, this button will automatically have been pressed. If you're using a modern version, i.e. 2017, 2018, 2019, then you just need to press this record button. So we're in 60 frames a second, and we can see that. In fact, it says 60 here in samples, and we're currently on frame 0. Frame 0 is the first keyframe. What that means is that we need to set the state it should be in as soon as the animation starts. And remember, I said we have this as 0, so what we need to do is type 1 in here and then type 0 again. And what this will do is it will set a keyframe right here with the alpha as 0. You can see these two little dots here. That's what that basically means. Now, because we're also going to be dealing with its axis on the Y, we also need to state right here the keyframe, the position Y. So whatever you have as your position right here, you need to set that as your keyframe as well. So in Y, retype whatever it has right there. So 290.14. That's for me. So that's been set now. So its initial starting point is there, and its initial color is what we have right there. So I want this to kind of fade quickly on the screen so we can see what's happening. So it says saved. So I'm going to go to frame number 5 right there and hit return. And it'll take me to frame 5 in the animation. So at frame 5, I want us to be able to completely see what the text says. So I've typed 255. I also want the position to be exactly the same right here. So I retype 290.14. But you'll notice we now have 3, just like we did on the first keyframe right there. If we hadn't have changed this Y, this one would have been blank. So make sure we have 3 there. So I want this animation to do it over the course of probably 1 whole second, and I want it to fade as it's scrolling down. So 1 whole second would be 60 frames. So let's have this whole animation played within a second. So we need to go to frame 60, which is 1 second. And I'm going to change this position now, but I'm going to use the move tool right here and move it down to about there. I'm also going to change the alpha right here back to 0. And what that will do is it will play the animation from here, scrolling down and fading out at the same time. So once we've done that, we have all our keyframes set. Just press the record button. Head back into the project window, click on saved anim right there, and then click loop time, untick, because we don't want it to play over and over and over. Now, if we press play now, we should see this actually happen. We should see the save. There we are. So it says text saved and fades away. We only want this to happen when we press the save button. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can have this occur. We can set new animation states, we can set different animation states and all kinds of things. But the easiest and simplest way to do this is just turn on the actual component itself. So if we untick animator, right here, we could do it that way. And I guess it's up to you which one you want to do. I don't think there's any real set way, but we'll do this. I'll tell you what, we'll do it the proper way, but I'll explain the easier way as we go through. So if we go back to our animation and double click on our saved text controller, which is this one right here, you can see it's called save text.controller. Double click and you'll be presented with the animator in whichever window you have it. And all we need to do, I've just zoomed out a little, is set a new state. So right click here, create state, empty. Now on this new state, right click and then set as default state. What this means is that this animation will play this animation by default. It will always play new state. Since there is no animation attached to new state, no animation will occur. So if we head back to our scene view and click on save text, and everything is in place now for us to modify our script. So let's go to our scripts folder and click on, I think it's button controls we've got it in, isn't it? Save load, save load, that's the one. So if we open up save load in Visual Studio, and all we'll need to do is declare the variable, which is that save text, play the animation when we save it, and when we're complete, revert it back to the new state. So whenever the animation isn't playing, it has to be that new state animation, just so as we can reset the animation as many times as we like. So once this is loaded, there we go. Let's add in a new variable. So public game object, and we'll call it save anim semicolon. And when we save the note, what we need to do is we actually need to use a coroutine. Now, a coroutine is a way of controlling things via time. So what we'll initially do here is we'll write this coroutine, and we need to go enumerator, and we can call this anything we want. So let's call it something relative to what we're doing. Save text roll, something like that. Open close bracket, open curly bracket. And within here, we need to have save anim.get component. So we're going to get that animator component. So animator, open close bracket, dot play, and in brackets and quotes, the name of that animation that we have just created. Right there in that animation, we need to make sure it is that one. And we had it as saved anim. So what I like to do is I go to the animation itself right here with the little play button, F2, copy that name, and then paste it between those quotes, just so as we get it perfectly right. We don't want it to be a case of we misspelt something so it doesn't work. So quote, close bracket, semicolon, and after the course of a second, we can then play the new state. So we revert it back to that new state. So yield return new, wait 4 seconds, and in brackets 1 semicolon. Now the idea of what this line does is it prevents the next line of code from executing until 1 second has passed. After 1 second has passed, we can then copy that save anim, get component line, and change the animation name to new state. And remember, if we go back into Unity, back into Animator, that is the name of that new state animation, new space state. Let's click back on Scene View and then back into Visual Studio. And next thing we need to do is after we have saved, we go here and then we need to start that coroutine. And we can literally type start coroutine and in brackets the name of that coroutine. So save text roll, open close bracket, semicolon, and save the script. So what's happening here is after we have saved, we are starting the animation within the coroutine. And the reason we have to use a coroutine is because we're controlling time with this line right here. We can't actually do that with inside a normal method, such as void save notes. We can't use that line, it just doesn't work. So we need to use the coroutine. So now we have the coroutine set, we can go back into Unity. And remember, it's this save button. So if we go to it, it's on app controls. And now we have to have that game object right there, and that's save text. So we put that there, and I'm going to save my scene. And now I'm going to press play. And we can see no animation will play, nothing will occur, but we can press what we want and then press on save. Text saved. Perfect. And if we press it again, we get the same thing. So let's delete all our text, save again, and there's our animation. It's just a nice little feature to have to say it's been saved. So next tutorial, what we're going to deal with is we'll deal with this close button, I think, next time. So I'd like to have a close button that basically says, do you want to save, do you want to close, or do you want to cancel this window and go back to your notepad? So we're going to focus solely on that next tutorial, and maybe if we have time, we'll start looking at things like a little startup splash screen that you see on apps, a bit more button functionality, and then we'll move on to, well, the final stage of this app. So this tutorial, we're going to focus on our little exit button right here, and we're going to have a little pop-up that says, do you want to save, do you want to cancel, or quit? So you'll basically be working with that. It's going to be not tough, but it'd be interesting to see how it's done. Don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon as well. Stay up to date with every tutorial in this series and indeed everything else on my channel. And with that in mind, let's get to work. So the way we're going to do this is all going to be inside. If we go to Game Object UI, it's going to be all inside something called a panel right there. And a panel is a way of containing, little bits of information inside one game object. You can see here that if we change the size of the panel, it kind of dims the area that it surrounds. So we're going to have a panel probably about that big, and I'm going to have it in the center. And if we move it with our rect tool, we should be able to align it fairly well. About there. I'll get it eventually. There we go. And this is only going to appear when we click this X button up here. So within this, we now need to create more buttons. And the great thing is what we can do is we can select these buttons that we have down here. For example, the save button, duplicate them inside here. But what I want to do with this canvas first is change the coloring. So I'm going to have it darker. So I'm going to have it kind of, it looks gray. Although it's black, it looks grey, but that's because of the alpha. The alpha is currently set to 100. 0 alpha means it's see-through. Complete alpha means it's opaque, and obviously anywhere in between is translucent. By default, it's set to 100. I'm going to leave it as 100. So within the panel, right-click, UI, and go to text. And let's have this text center, top, right there. Change the position and get it into place by clicking the alignment right there. Bring it down ever so slightly. And let's change the text to say, are you sure you want to quit? And let's expand this so we can see it a little better and just realign it back in the center. And let's have it as white. So in here, this is where we're going to add in the other buttons. So let's duplicate the first one, which is currently save. So hold Control, press D, and then drag that inside the panel, and then move that button to there. So what do we want to do? Well, we can actually leave that save as it is because that will still save. So we're going to give ourselves a couple of different options. So we're going to have save, and underneath we're going to have quit, and then underneath that we're going to have cancel. So we can duplicate the save button, hold Control, press D once again, bring it down to about there, and then once again and bring it to about there. So obviously we need to change the colouring just to give it a bit more context rather than all 3 green buttons. You don't have to, it's just something I want to do. So let's have this as maybe a kind of red, maybe kind of a purpley colour. Okay, we'll go with that. I'm going to change the text on this one to say, in fact, we'll have it as cancel. So this button will be the one that takes us back to our actual notepad. But what we also want to do is kind of prevent ourselves from doing anything else in the notepad. But we'll deal with that in just a moment. So this button is going to be maybe a red colour. That'll do. And we'll have this one just simply say quit. And next, we'll keep save as save, won't we? Because we'll keep it aligned with how this one looks. So just keep note of how it looks over here. Make sure this is how you want it to look on your app. So let's rename the buttons. So we'll have save button, and I'll read this as save button dupe, short for duplicate. This one is going to be quit button, and this one is going to be cancel button. Okay, so next thing we need to do, excuse me, is to, on the panel, right click, UI, and attach another panel. And this panel is going to be taken away outside, and then it's going to be stretched. So make sure it is stretched, and then 0, 0, 0, 0, and then turn the color to 0 alpha. Now you don't have to, I guess you could do that. Or maybe do that. I guess it's up to you. Honestly, it's your app. You could have it completely like that. You could have it completely off. I'm going to have it completely off. What this will do is prevent us from actually pressing any other UI elements on the screen apart from whatever is in our panel. So I'm going to take this panel and place it inside the panel again, but at the top. So the reason we have it at the top is because we still want to interact with these buttons. So these all come on top of whatever is here. So it's the ordering in the hierarchy. So next thing we need to do is let's sort these buttons out and make sure they all work. We know the save button works. It's a duplicate of this button. So let's get the quit and cancel working as well. Let's go to our scripts folder. And I think it's button and control. Is that the one we have? Should we do it in button control? Let's do it in button control for now. So this one is going to contain a couple of different things, I think. So the first one is going to be cancel that we'll have. So let's have public void cancel button, open close bracket, open curly bracket. And in here, all we need to do is basically turn off this panel. So obviously we need to declare it as a variable. So public game object, and we'll have this as just the panel, I guess. And this will say the panel dot set active false semicolon. We'll also do this close button up here as well. So we'll have that as public void close button, open close bracket, open curly bracket. And what this one will do is actually set the panel as active. So we can take that line and change it from false to true. So we've got that one working. That one works. Cancel works. So we just need quit. And that one's really easy. We can just have public void quit button, open close bracket, open curly bracket, and it's application dot quit, open close bracket, semicolon, and save that script. So next thing we need to do is apply that script to, or rather apply the variables to that script that we've just created, which is going to be this panel. And it is on app controls, and we just need to drag and drop the panel over there. And then let's go to our quit button. App controls is fine, so we need to go onto there, go onto button control, and it's quit button right there. And let's go to the cancel button, and we've already got that there, the game object, app controls, yep. So here, down to button control, and it is a cancel button. There we are. So what that means now is that if we turn this panel off up here, so we click the panel, turn off up here, select our close button up here, and then we need to click plus, drag over app controls, click no function, click button control, and then click on close button. Make sure you click close button, not quit button. And let's save our project. So if we press play now, we should be able to do whatever we need to do in our notepad. And then if we click close, we'll be presented with this. But we also can't actually do anything. Remember, this panel prevents us from doing anything else, but we can save, quit, or cancel. So saving, obviously, would still save it. Quit would quit us out the application. Now, it won't work here because you can't quit it out of the actual engine itself. But believe me, when you come to build it, that quit button will work. And cancel just takes you back to your app. You can carry on going. So, clear. There we go. Yeah, let's save it and let's quit. So that was how you would get out of it. So all of those buttons work now. The button functionality is pretty much complete in the app. And I think for you guys, you should now take the time to refine how this app looks rather than take what I've done, because I've done this simply to show you the mechanics of how it works and how you perform it, how you get everything working. But if you perhaps source images that say save or clear or whatever, make your buttons look a little nicer, I think it's up to you how you want it to look. So next tutorial, what we're going to do? Well, I think we're going to have a little splash screen. That splash screen is just going to set like a white screen that says Jimmy's Notepad and then just brings you to the Notepad. So we'll be dealing a little bit with scene changes in that. And we'll also actually do the final bits to the app and show you how to build it. So the next tutorial will be the last one for this short mini series. To be honest, I've enjoyed making this little series. It's been quite fun. So yeah, guys, you just need to refine how your app looks now. Get it all set, ready to go, because we're nearly at the end. So in this tutorial, we're going to take a look at a little intro screen for the app, which is going to be like a bit of a splash screen. We'll also look at building and how we can build, as well as a couple of settings that we can tweak. Don't forget, click the subscribe button, click the bell icon as well. Stay up to date with every tutorial that I have on this channel because there's loads for you guys to learn. And with that in mind, let's get to work. So, first things first, let's create that splash intro screen. So let's go to File and click on New Scene. And the first thing we'll actually do is go to File and Save Scene As. So we actually basically save it because there's not going to be a lot to this scene. So let's save this as intro scene. Nothing too important. And what we'll need to do now is go to File, Build Settings, and then when it loads up here, all we need to do is click on Add Open Scenes, and we need to get rid of the sample scene that comes with Unity built in. So we can just right click and remove selection. We can then close that and then design our quick little intro scene. And all I'm going to do is go to Game Object, go to UI and go to Raw Image. And I'm just going to stretch this raw image white as it is all the way across. So we set our anchor position. We've dealt with this before. We know what we're doing there. So I'm going to stretch it across and zero out the entire position. So it just basically looks like a white screen. In the middle of that white screen, I'm just going to put the name of the notepad. And I guess you can design this little intro scene however you want. It is entirely up to you. So I'm just going to quickly go there, go to text. I'm going to have the text as jet black. I'm going to have it center. And I'm going to align the text center as well. And just call it Jimmy's Notepad. Probably increase the font size a little. So let's have it as 20, and that'll do the trick. So I'm going to save that scene right there. And now what we need to do is create a script which allows us to go from this scene to our actual scene. So in our scripts folder down here, right click, create C# script. And let's call this move scene. And then let's open that up in Visual Studio. So this script is not going to be too complicated at all. We are going to have to deal with a namespace. But we've already dealt with that before, haven't we? Because we've dealt with the UI element of objects. So we know what we're doing here. So top, we need to go here. Using Unity Engine dot scene management semicolon. And we're going to use something called a coroutine. Now the previous two scripts have just been inside basic methods, and we have here, remember that coroutine, say text role. So we're going to have to use a coroutine yet again because we're going to be using that yield. So we're going to wait for the script to kind of move along in this move scene script. So let's get rid of void update, we don't need it, and the annotations because we don't need that either. And let's start by going enumerator, and let's call it move to next. You can call it anything you want. Open close bracket, open curly bracket, and yield, return, new, wait for seconds, and I'm just going to wait for 3 seconds on this intro scene. After that, what we need to do is scene manager dot load scene, and in brackets the number of our scene. Now you'll have noticed that when we go back to Unity, go to file and build settings, that number right there, that means that's the scene number. So when we add our main scene in a couple of moments time, that scene is going to become number 1, and that is the scene we need to load. So back into Visual Studio, we just need to put 1 right there, close bracket, semicolon. Final thing to do is start that coroutine when the script starts up. So start coroutine, in brackets, the name of that coroutine you've written. Move to next. Open close bracket, semicolon, and save. So let's head back into Unity and let's go to game object because we need an object for it to actually be in. So game object, create empty, and let's just drag and drop that move scene onto there. Console, I'm just going to clear that error out. It's not important. So what's going to happen now is when we press play, after 3 seconds, we'll go from this scene to our other scene, providing we add it in. So we can save that as it is now, head to our assets, go to our main app scene, and we have to do the exact same things we did with our previous one. File, build settings, and add open scenes. So now you can see it is scene number 1. Save that scene, and then let's head to our intro scene and test this out. So we'll load it up. 3 seconds, we'll go to our main app. There we go. Simple. So we've come this far. All the functionality works. We've got our scenes all sorted. Everything is as we'd expect it to. What do we do now to make this an app? Well, what I like to do is I like to actually test it in Windows first. So if we go to File, Build Settings, we originally had it as Android. And because the scene, or rather the project, is not that large, we could probably just kind of switch it back to PC, Mac and Linux, and then click on Build and Run. So you see what I've done there? It would be from Android or iOS or whatever you're building for. Click on Mac, PC, Linux, click on Switch Platform, and then click on Build and Run. What that will do is it will build a Windows version of this app for you to test on your machine first. After you're happy with all that, what you need to do is make sure you do have the correct platform which you're building for selected here. Make sure that Unity logo is right next to it. So let's take a quick look at what we need to do from here. If we go to Edit, go to Preferences, and then go to External Tools right here, we need to make sure down the bottom of this list, for example, if you're building for Android, at least because I'm in Windows here, so I'm going to basically aim for Android. If you're trying to build for iPhone or iPad or whatever, you would need to build this on a Mac. So we have Android, the SDK, JDK and NDK. You need to make sure you have these installed on your machine. You can browse the location. If you don't have them, you can download, or rather click on download, and it will bring you to a place where you can actually install the necessary components you need to create these mobile games or apps. You can see I've got all mine installed, so I wouldn't have a problem. You just need to make sure that you do click download and have the path here. It is very simple to follow. It may take a couple of minutes to get that sorted, but that's all you need to do to ensure that you're able to build for, in this case, Android. Next, if we go to Edit, go down to Project Settings, and what we need to do here is take a quick look at a couple of different things. The first thing we're going to take a look at is Player. Now, this doesn't necessarily represent the player, for example, in a game. That's not what that means here. What this actually means is the executable player that this will be contained in. So, for example, if we change it to PC, you can set everything here. You can set for iOS, but because we're currently building for Android, this is what it currently is. So, company name would be whatever company name you have. For me, it would be JV Unity. Product name would be the name of your app, simply Jimmy's Notepad, whatever you want to call it. You can create an icon for it right there. You can pretty much use anything really. You could create a quick little icon in Paint or Photoshop, save it and just import it into here as a texture. For example, I guess you could maybe use that close sign. I'll use that for now and see if it does anything. So let's get back to Player. So drag and drop. That will be your icon, as you can see. Down here we have some further settings. So we've got the resolution and presentation, native aspect ratio. You can set everything here. Default orientation. We have to make sure, because the way this app is, we need to click on portrait. Portrait is important because we don't want it to be any other way. It won't fit any other way, will it? Because that's the way we've built it. Why do we need to rotate it or anything? So just make sure you have portrait selected right there. Splash image. Now, this is something which does confuse people. We've just created that splash screen, but that's not what this means. For example, if we build in Windows on a PC, that splash screen is like a little box that pops up before you start the game to have your selections. So you could work with some of these if you wanted to. By default, if you're in a free one, clicking on here, that's show splash screen. That's the Unity splash screen. So you may have played games in the past, or if you're familiar with Unity, that when you start it up, you have that Unity splash screen. So you've got some other options here that you can use. Static splash image, for example. What I would recommend is probably playing around with some of these settings. You're never going to break anything, and if you do, you can always undo. So I'm going to click on splash image to close that up. You have some other settings. This is just stuff which kind of isn't particularly necessary at all. This is a lot of stuff if you're really getting deep into development. For a beginner, I honestly wouldn't worry about, even at an intermediate level, I wouldn't worry about any of this at all. A lot of the default settings in Unity are pretty decent as they are. Publishing settings. So this is one thing you will need to use if you're publishing to the Google Play Store, for example. You will need to create a key store. So you can create a new one and you basically put your password in, confirm the password, change everything you need to. Google does actually have some documentation on what you need to do at this point and how you can use the key store to integrate it into the Play Store. So don't worry about that. If you quickly, on Google, key store, Unity, you'll find tons of documentation on it. But it's quite simply just a case of creating that key store. XR settings, in this case, are not really relevant because it's just a Notepad app. The same things kind of do apply for iPad and iPhone. It's all the same kind of things. You just have to make sure that your orientation is set, your name is set, your icon set, whatever. But generally, if you change something, for example, in Android, it will transfer over to other devices as well. As you can see, by default, it is on portrait. Splash image again, if you want to have that. other settings. Again, a lot of these is just kind of very, well, it's easy to use really when you know what you're doing. But of course, some of these settings are difficult, but honestly, don't worry about them. For this app and what we intend to use it for, no problem whatsoever. So once you've got all your settings in place, you're happy with everything, you can tweak this a little bit more, just make sure everything is perfect. Probably one final thing to actually do, just in case, because I've been caught out by this before, is if you go to your main app, press play, and make sure you do actually click on clear and save. Reason being is you don't want text to suddenly appear somewhere else that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So I think it's just kind of nice to have that there just in case. So what do you do now? Well, the final thing that you really need to do is back in that build settings. And once you're on Android or iOS, whatever you're building for, you just click build. You wouldn't need to click build and run because obviously it's not going to work exactly as we would want, but you would click build and that would build the file that you need. I think it's an SDK file. But yeah, all you do at that point, once you have built that file, is you go onto the Google Play Store or wherever it is you're publishing. You need to follow what they tell you to do, and then you upload everything that you've done. So when you've created that build, you would upload that because that then contains everything that the store needs to read, especially with that key store. So there are a couple of different things you could route through in the project settings. I guess it's not too important. You've got things like quality, but again, this is a Notepad app. These things are not really relevant because I think essentially these are more relevant to game development than app development. But either way, feel free to play around with them. So where do you go from here? Once you've completed it, you have built your app and you have it published on the Play Store or wherever. That's all there is to it. Making an app is actually a lot easier than what people think, and there's no set way of doing it, I guess. There are probably better tools out there to make apps with. I just think it's kind of cool that Unity can do this because people associate Unity with just video game development, but it's not. It can do many things. It can create animations. You can make an animated film in Unity if you wanted to, I guess. So yeah, if you have any questions, guys, leave a comment below. If you've enjoyed this series, please let me know in the comments as well. I'd love to see what you're doing as well. So please let me know about that. If you want to check out some video game development or just, smaller app development or anything like that, check out my channel. There is loads and loads for you guys to learn. So I hope you've enjoyed this short series. And yeah, guys, I will see you around in one of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching.